Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's 8 p.m. and this is a new edition of Panorama News. In the upcoming 45 minutes, we'll be bringing you the latest of the political, economic and sports news from all around the world. I'm Hani Saif. I'll be bringing you the political news for tonight, and we'll start off with the political headlines coming up next. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi greets Arab and Muslim leaders on the occasion of Ramadan. Prime Minister forms a committee tasked with following projects. And attack kills 5 Jordanian intelligence officers at Palestinian camp. Welcome back. The news in details. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi greeted the Egyptian people and exchanged greeting cables with the leaders of the Arab and Muslim world on the occasion of the start of the holy month of Ramadan. The president wished the Muslim leaders and nations a happy Ramadan full of blessings and prosperity. The president also received greeting cables from Prime Minister Sharif Ismail and Minister of Defense Sudi Subhi, in which they wished welfare and prosperity for the whole country. President al-Sisi also received a phone call from Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Sheikh Ahmed al-Tayyib, greeting him on the occasion of Ramadan and wishing him and the country more prosperity and development. Prime Minister Sharif Ismail decided on Monday to form a committee tasked with following up the national projects. In its membership, the committee will include Assistant Secretary General of the Cabinet for National Projects, Assistant Housing Minister for Public Services, Assistant Housing Minister for Slum Areas, Assistant Health Minister, Assistant Education Minister, Assistant Irrigation Minister, Assistant Transportation Minister, and Assistant Youth Minister. The committee will also be tasked with following up all current projects in various developmental fields such as housing, drinking water, sewage, education, roads and water resources. Foreign Minister Sameh Shukri said the Egyptian people's will was the main element of the Egyptian moves following the 30th of June revolution. This came in his first radio interview with Radio Masr. Shukri pointed that Egypt took institutional approaches to explain the reality of the revolution incidents to all the world, adding that Egypt's foreign policy following the revolution is based on balancing its interests. Shukri also said that Egypt's presidency of the UN Security Council in May of 2016 was a result of the moves taken by the state following the June revolution. Jordan's government spokesman said a terrorist attack on a local office of the National Intelligence Agency on Monday killed 5 employees, suggesting Daesh militants were involved. He said security forces were investigating who was responsible for the terrorist attack on the first day of the holy month of Ramadan. No group immediately claimed responsibility for the attack.
3 Jordanian intelligence officers and 2 other security personnel were killed in an attack on a security office in a Palestinian refugee camp on the outskirts of the Jordanian capital. A government official described it as a terrorist attack, giving no further detail. The Baqa camp is the largest camp in Jordan. The camp has a population of tens of thousands, including many Syrian refugees who have settled there since the start of the Syria conflict in 2011. A highway separates the security compound and the camp. Government spokesman Mohammed al-Mu'mani said that the attack targeted the intelligence department's local office in the camp that houses over 70,000 refugees. Mu'mani said that security forces are chasing 2 culprits and investigating the circumstances of the terrorist attack. Earlier this year, a large security operation was mounted in the northern city of Irbid, in which several Daesh militants were killed in a shootout. The security authorities later said they had carried out a preemptive strike against a group of militants linked to Syria who were planning suicide attacks on shopping malls and government buildings. The kingdom has long been a target of militant groups, including both Al-Qaeda and Daesh terrorist group. King Abdullah has repeatedly warned that the threat from the terrorist groups poses the biggest threat to Jordan's long-term stability. The kingdom has sent dozens of terrorists to prisons in the last few years, many of whom came from Syria or were arrested while trying to cross the border.
Syrian regime's troops, supported by Russia and US-backed fighters, pressed twin offensives against Daesh terrorist group on Monday, as pressure built on the militants' northern strongholds in the war-torn country. The advance comes as 17 civilians, including 8 children, were killed in airstrikes on a market in eastern Syria on Monday, the first day of the holy month of Ramadan. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the strikes took place on Shara, a town held by Daesh terrorist group in Deir ez-Zor province. Heavy airstrikes hit Daesh militants held areas in and outside the divided city of Deir ez-Zor from early Monday. The observatory relies on a network of sources inside Syria to gather its information on the 5-year-old conflict, which has killed more than 280,000 people and displaced millions. It says it determines whether strikes were carried out by Syrian, Russian or US-led coalition aircraft based on the location of the raids, flight patterns and the type of planes and munitions involved. Saudi Arabia's Foreign Minister Adel al-Jubeir on Monday described the fighting in the Syrian city of Aleppo as a crime and a tragedy. Speaking after talks with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry regarding the Syrian crisis, al-Jubeir said that the indiscriminate bombings of civilians and hospitals was a criminal act. Monday marks the second day in the current round of peace talks, which are focused on finding a way to restore at least a partial truce in Syria amid the situation in Aleppo. Earlier, Kerry said that progress was being made towards an understanding on how to reduce the violence in the city, but that there is still more work that is needed. An international aid organization said the Daesh terrorist group has been shooting at civilians as they try to flee the fighting between Iraqi government forces and the militants in the city of Fallujah, west of Baghdad. The Norwegian Refugee Council said in a report that a number of those fleeing civilians have been killed as they tried to cross the Euphrates River. Iraqi forces, backed by US-led coalition airstrikes, have been fighting to retake the Daesh terrorist-held city of Fallujah since late May, but the advance stalled last week because the resistance the militants have put up and because an estimated 50,000 civilians remain trapped inside the city. The NRC put the total number of families who managed to flee from the outskirts of Fallujah in the early days of the Iraqi offensive, which started May 21st, at 2,980. UN envoy Ismail al-Sheikh Ahmed said on Monday that Yemen's warring parties have pledged to free all child prisoners, but have failed to reach agreement on a wider release for the holy month of Ramadan. He said that in the prisoners' committee an agreement was made on the unconditional release of children. There was no immediate word on how many children are held prisoners by the Saudi-backed government or by Iran-backed Jade rebels and their allies. We have the details.
UN envoy to peace talks in Kuwait Ismail al-Sheikh Ahmed said that parties to over a year of civil war in Yemen have agreed to release all child prisoners they are holding. The unconditional release of children was agreed, and mechanics of the release of detainees in the coming days was addressed. Houthi rebels and Yemeni Saudi-backed government in exile are trying to reach the peace agreement in negotiations aimed at ending the war that has killed at least 6,200 people and caused a humanitarian crisis in the poorest country. There was no immediate comment from either side's peace delegation in Kuwait on UN envoy's announcement. It is clear how many child prisoners are being held, but Yemeni political sources say that the Houthis and the government submitted in late May a list of almost 7,000 names of prisoners they say are being held by the other side. Human Rights Watch said this month that both sides in the conflict were deploying child soldiers, and UNICEF reported that 900 children had been killed and 1,300 wounded during the conflict in 2015. The UN has struggled to encourage a prisoner release in Yemen, coinciding with the holy month of Ramadan, which began today, and over a month of negotiations have produced few concrete results. On the ground, security sources said that suspected militant attacks the airport in Yemen's government-held second city Aden, sparking a firefight in which at least one civilian was killed. Around 20 gunmen stormed the main entrance road to the airport in the city of Khorramshahr district, demanding the release of a militant who was detained late last month. The detained militant was among 7 suspected members of Daesh terrorist group, whose arrest was announced by the authorities in Aden on May 28th. Aden is the headquarters of the Saudi-backed government of President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi, as the capital Sana'a and swaths of the north and center of the country were held by rebels.
Saudi Arabia has rejected a United Nations report that criticized the military coalition it is leading in Yemen, saying it was based primarily on information supplied by its advisories. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon added the Saudi-led coalition to an annual blacklist, claiming that its airstrikes were behind most deaths in the war. In Yemen, it also blacklisted the Houthi rebels and forces loyal to the former President Ali Abdullah Saleh, which have already featured on the annual list for the past 5 years. However, coalition spokesman Brigadier General Ahmed al-Asiri said in a statement that the UN had not based enough of its report on information supplied by the Saudi-backed Yemeni government. Asiri has criticized reports by international human rights organizations of civilian deaths caused by coalition airstrikes as coming after inadequate investigation. The African Union mission in Somalia said on Monday that 5 African Union peacekeepers in Somalia have been arrested over alleged illegal sales of military supplies. AMISOM said the soldiers were found in possession of fuel and sandbags and were detained in a joint operation with Somali police that followed an investigation and a period of surveillance. AMISOM, which did not reveal the nationality of the arrested soldiers, promised requisite steps to ensure that this practice is uprooted from within its ranks to ensure such acts do not derail its mission. AMISOM's task is to shore up Somalia's internationally backed but fragile government in the face of threats from al-Qaeda-affiliated Shabab extremists. Britain said on Monday there is a high threat of attacks against foreigners in shopping areas in South Africa, 2 days after a similar advisory was issued by the United States Embassy in Pretoria. South Africa's government said the country was safe, following the U.S. warning on Saturday. The British government said upmarket shopping areas and malls in the commercial hub of Johannesburg and Cape Town, widely regarded as South Africa's tourism capital, were the main target areas in the suspected planned attacks. South Africa's State Security Minister David Mohlobo said in a statement on Monday that his country remains a strong and stable democratic country and that there is no immediate danger posed by the alert. Sri Lankan police were Monday racing to defuse unexploded bombs that fell on villages near the capital overnight and destroyed hundreds of homes after a huge and deadly fire at an ammunition depot. At least 1 soldier death and thousands of villagers fled their homes after fire broke out at the Salawa military complex late Sunday, triggering a series of explosions that sent shrapnel flying into the air. On Monday, police special task force commandos were deployed to defuse multi-barrel rockets, artillery rounds, rocket-propelled grenades and mortar bombs, which landed in residential areas. And Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has thrown his support behind ridding the Korean peninsula of nuclear weapons. Rouhani met with the South Korean President Park Geun-hye on Monday during her visit to Tehran and said Iran seeks a world free of weapons of mass destruction, especially nuclear weapons. Park said she has asked for Iran's help in implementing UN Security Council resolutions calling for the nuclear disarmament of the Korean peninsula. The remarks were aimed at North Korea, which has been hit by tough UN sanctions over its nuclear weapons program. North Korea has conducted 4 nuclear tests and also launched a long-range rocket earlier this year. Park arrived in Tehran for the first visit by a South Korean president to Iran since 1962. Iran's official news agency said the 2 countries signed 19 documents of cooperation and memorandums of understandings. Hillary Clinton aims to corral the final delegates needed to clinch the Democratic U.S. presidential nomination after a long struggle against Bernie Sanders on Tuesday, with voters casting ballots in 6 states as she ramps up attacks on presumptive Republican nominee Donald Trump. Voters in California, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, New Jersey and New Mexico will vote in nominating contests on Tuesday. Clinton has scheduled rallies in the Los Angeles area on Monday. The Clinton campaign hopes the former Secretary of State will effectively lock up the nomination early on Tuesday evening with a victory in New Jersey, taking the focus of the fractious battle she has been fighting in California against Sanders. Clinton may declare herself the party's nominee before the polls close there. Germany's head of state, 76-year-old President Joachim Gauck, said Monday he won't seek a second term in 2017 due to his age, a move that could cause complications for Chancellor Angela Merkel heading into an election year.
German President Joachim Gauck said he would not serve a second five-year term, a decision that could trigger a battle between the parties in Chancellor Angela Merkel's ruling coalition over who should succeed him. Although the position of president is largely ceremonial in Germany, the selection of the last two heads of state has caused problems for Merkel, and it risks dividing her government in the run-up to the next federal election in 2017. Merkel initially opposed the appointment of Gauck, a 75-year-old Lutheran pastor who played an important role in the peaceful protests in communist East Germany that led to the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. But she was forced to accept him when other parties, including her coalition partner at the time, the Free Democrats, came together and backed him. There was broad cross-party support for Gauck to serve a second term, but he said today that his age had been a factor in the decision, which he described as not easy. The president is not directly elected by the people, but rather by the Federal Convention, an assembly of members of the German parliament and the same number of delegates sent from the state parliaments. That means that Merkel must win the support of at least one other big party for her nominee. Any party can propose a candidate for president.
French authorities on Monday evacuated 1,850 migrants from a tent camp which had sprung up in a Paris park, where conditions had nosedived after one of the wettest Mays on record. The migrants were taken by bus to about 60 different reception centers in the Paris region, in what was the 23rd such evacuation of the past year. Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo said that there had been 1,300 people counted at the camp, mostly Afghans, Sudanese and Eritreans, but that numbers had surged as word spread they would be rehoused. The camp had already been evacuated a month ago. French Interior Minister Bernard Cazeneuve said that France could take in 400 refugees a month from Greece as part of an EU relocation deal it signed last year. Ukraine's State Security Service said on Monday a French citizen detained in late May on the border with Poland had been planning attacks in France to coincide with the Euro 2016 football championship it is hosting. On Saturday, the Ukrainian Border Guard Service reported the unnamed 25-year-old had been arrested with an arsenal of weapons and explosives, including rocket launchers and Kalashnikov assault rifles in the vehicle. SBU Chief Vasily Gritsak said the man had made contact with armed groups in Ukraine with the aim of buying weapons and explosives. Gritsak said that his intended targets included Jewish and Muslim places of worship and buildings involved with the football tournament. French government administration buildings, including those dealing with tax collection, were also a target. Security officials in Europe are on high alert after terrorists killed 130 people in Paris last November and suicide bombers killed 32 people at Belgium's main international airport on the Brussels metro in March. Romania's leftist Social Democrats have emerged as the leading party in local elections. Partial official results showed on Monday, bolstering their chances of returning to government after a national ballot due in December. Central Electoral Bureau results from more than half of polling stations followed the PSD had won 43% of the votes in mayoral elections, followed by centrist Liberal Party with 34%. A small PSD ally, ALDE, got about 6%. The vote shows a resurgence in support for the PSD, whose government led by Victor Ponta resigned last November amid nationwide street protests following a deadly nightclub fire in Bucharest. The fire had reignited concerns over widespread official corruption, with many blaming Ponta's government for not doing enough to tackle the problem. Romania is currently run by a caretaker government of technocrats with a limited one-year mandate that runs until the December parliamentary election. Former Wall Street investor Pedro Pablo held a slim lead in Peru's presidential election as partial results showed him 1 percentage point ahead of Keiko Fujimori, the daughter of an imprisoned former authoritarian leader. With 88% of all votes counted early on Monday, Pablo, known in Peru by his initial PPK, had 50.5% support, while Fujimori trailed on 49.5%. The gap had narrowed slightly from the previous count. Fujimori had for long been the favorite to win the election, but Pablo caught up with her in the final days of the campaign as Peruvians weighed the legacy of her father, Alberto Fujimori, and fresh scandals involving her close advisors. Many Peruvians credit Alberto Fujimori with defeating violent Shining Path rebels and building schools and hospitals in rural areas when he was president in 1990 to 2000. But his authoritarian style divided the country, and he is now serving a 25-year sentence for corruption and human rights abuses. A tropical depression threatened Florida and parts of the southeastern United States with severe thunderstorms after being upgraded to Tropical Storm Colin by the U.S. National Hurricane Center. The storm, which is expected to hit Florida's Gulf Coast by Monday afternoon, began drenching parts of the southeastern United States on Sunday. Forecasters warned of severe thunderstorms along the East Coast and issued a tropical storm warning for Florida's Gulf Coast. Colin is the second named storm in a week at the beginning of what is expected to be a brisk Atlantic Ocean hurricane season running through November 30th. Florida heightened the response level of its State Emergency Operations Center on Sunday. In Texas, where torrential rains led to flooding last week that killed at least 16 people, waters were expected to recede as the weather dried out. The family of boxing legend Muhammad Ali on Sunday accompanied his body back to his hometown, Louisville, ahead of a public funeral procession and service expected to draw huge crowds in honor of the greatest. Former President Bill Clinton and comedian Billy Crystal are among those due to speak Friday at a memorial in a sports arena in the Kentucky city where Ali, a three-time world heavyweight champion, grew up and threw his first punches. The charismatic Ali, a dazzling fighter and outspoken civil rights activist who became one of the 20th century's most towering figures, died on Friday at the age of 74 after health problems complicated by a long battle with Parkinson's disease. A private plane carrying the casket and Ali's relatives arrived in Louisville, the largest city in Kentucky, from Arizona, where he died.